proverb, I am because we are, is the foundation of the Acbn YouTube channel. Tap in for all of our remarkable content and ecosystem mobilization through the phenomenal practitioners and thought leaders we engage on this channel. In the words of Adrienne Marie Brown, things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight to pull back the veil. Get ready for another amazing Acbn powered interview.
Yours and welcome to the social procurement panel. And before we get started, I wanted to also thank this tremendous work within the Canadian context, within our community specifically. And obviously, big shout outs to Victor Bousselet for his leadership and his taking things to the next level in regards to understanding the importance of social procurement in our panel. So good evening, Victor. How are you?
I'm blessed, highly favored, and looking forward to the session.
Good. So we're gonna actually just get you just to chime into what social procurement is to you. When people hear that term, social procurement, actually, you know what, let's do our land acknowledgement first, and then we're gonna ask Victor that quick question. And I know that's not on the agenda, but we're gonna ask Victor that question. So we begin by acknowledging the original stewards on the various lands we are on. We acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge those who toiled without compassion or compensation and the many forms of racism. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and we learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So good evening again, Victor, and hoping all is well with you and yours. So before we get into in terms of introducing our panelists, what is not just the importance, but what is social procurement, just in a brief statement from yourself, for those people who may be joining us and don't have.
Even though I'm not on the panel, no problem. Social procurement is about purchasing and purchasing power. The federal, provincial, municipal governments, private sector, they procure services from businesses. And we have the ability to create economic mobility for people. We have the ability to create better economic outcomes for Canadians by harnessing the power of social procurement. Hence the reason why we have remarkable stalwarts like Rosemary Powell, Stephen Callender, Narissa, Clement, and David LePage and others here to have this conversation. Once again, I'm not on the panel, so no question should be presented to me. Thank you, my friend.
I understand that, my brother. That was just the introduction in terms of obviously SETI being the sponsor behind this panel. So in that regard, we're going to go to our panelists, and someone who is no stranger to social procurement and to the community here in the city of Toronto. So welcome, Rosemary Powell. Good evening. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Great to see you, Roderick.
Absolutely, 100%. And we also have Stephen Callender from the African Canadian Contractors Association. Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening, Roderick. Nice seeing you again. Nice to be here with this on this panel.
Absolutely. And also we have David LePage. He's the founder of the Social Canada, or by Social Canada. Good evening, David.
Good evening, and thank you so much. As always, I'm always impressed with SETSI's leadership on these dialogues, and it's just amazing to have the opportunity to join the discussion today. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us. And also we have Narissa Allen, the founder of the Black Business Professionals of BC. Good evening, Narissa.
Hi, good evening, Roderick. Thanks for having me here today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you for joining us. And we also have Clement Asen, founder of the BIPOC Foundation. Good evening, Clement.
Good evening, Roderick, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks to you and everyone on the panel tonight.
All right, thank you very much to our esteemed panelists. And we're going to be going through a series of questions for our panelists this evening. And for those of you joining us here on the Zoom, if there's any questions, please do put them in the chat for our panelists, and I'm sure they will be honored and pleasured to address your questions. In terms of housekeeping, We're going to be probably here for about an hour and a half in terms of just getting your information from the panelists, but also the questions from our guests also in the Zoom room. Okay, so we're going to get right to it, and we're going to start with Narissa. So Narissa, in your work in the Black business and entrepreneurship ecosystem, what are some of the emerging trends in social procurement?
I think it's clearly there's a demand for diverse representation in the supply chain ecosystem. And corporations need to diversify their supply chains. They're also requiring their suppliers to show diversification in the supply chains. And as a result, we are seeing, and we're being approached more often in the recent months from industry as well as from government at various levels, looking for support in identifying and locating Black-owned businesses in various sectors. And luckily, we have tools to support those types of requests. We have a national database called Black Biz Global, which is a great resource for self-directed searches. And alternatively, we also have a business advisor managing our procurement portfolio, and they're also able to provide support for custom and personalized requests. So I think, the emerging trend is people want to diversify their supply chain.
Absolutely. And why is procurement, social procurement specifically, so important for Black businesses in BC, but also right across the country?
Yeah, I think because we just have not been, active in that space, and there's a lot of money to be made in that space. And I think it's incumbent upon us to not only to make sure our businesses are aware of the opportunity, but prepared and ready to apply and be successful in that area.
And what is the Black business and entrepreneurship ecosystem in BC doing to prepare those businesses?
So we've been working over the last 18 months to get businesses prepared in terms of understanding and being aware of what is out there. So we've been working with Procurement Assistance Canada as well as Social Canada to bring the awareness up to date. Our priority is to really increase that market access for Black-owned businesses. One of the avenues is procurement, is supply chain participation. So we have to do it strategically and look at where we are right now as businesses and where we need to be. So along that 18-month journey, we worked on awareness. We worked on readiness training specific to search and application process. And now we're moving towards execution and implementation through targeted transactions. So we've built a proprietary system that identifies to us all of the active contracts that are open at 2 levels of government. Right now, we're working on the provincial and the federal level of government. We're currently tracking all of those opportunities that are available for bidding. And this tool gives us both historical and current information that we use to inform strategic direction for growth opportunities. And example of that is based on our data, we know that there are currently 4,386 approximately listings being reported at the federal and the provincial level. And of those, 363 are in the delivery region of BC specifically. And of those, 265 listings are under the services category. So with this information, we've been able to go back to our membership and say to them, look, the government not only buys goods, they buy services. And many of our businesses weren't aware of that fact. And it's getting more interest, and it's allowing them to be more open to the idea of, there's something in this for us. So, it's a really robust tool, and it's, we've rolled out a portion of it. It also helps to amalgamate. So what we're doing is we're amalgamating all of the tender listings from all of the provinces and territories and the federal government onto our single platform. It makes it easy for our members to find opportunities in one location as opposed to having to go to every province's tender website, as well as the federal government. It's very cumbersome. It's time consuming for them to do that. So we wanted to provide an opportunity for them to be able to, just make it as easy as possible for them to participate in this sector.
Incredible and excellent work that you are doing with Black businesses in British Columbia, and obviously in terms of just setting trends and the expectations for Black businesses right across the country, to be commended. Great work. Thank you very much for that. All right. And next we're going to go to David. Good evening, David.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And
Good.
yourself?
I'm rainy day here in Vancouver. Winter's coming.
All right. Yes, definitely. All across the country, we're experiencing that same thing. So, David, you've worked in the ecosystem for decades. What is the biggest win when it comes down to social procurement, the social procurement space you have seen in Canada and internationally?
So I think some of the biggest shifts is in the last 2 years, we've seen dramatic shifts, especially on the federal government level, where they've actually now have policy at Treasury Board and procurement services that their $24 billion a year that they spend buying goods and services for the federal government is no longer lowest price, but about best value. So if we can shift that demand side, and then we start to say, okay, the demand side is saying we want to get best value. We want to change that marketplace from being just economic transactions to actually be a way to transform communities. It opens up, and I think, Narissa is absolutely right. The challenge and the opportunity now as we move the demand side is to create the opportunities for the equity deserving groups, Black businesses that have been just left out because it was who can get the lowest price. And that doesn't build community. It doesn't build capacity. It just creates and supports an unjust economic system. So in my mind, moving the demand side, we're starting to see the construction industry, and it's great to see Stephen here because I think he can talk to that about, we know the purchasing is going on. We know that if we can shift the demand to be about creating a social value marketplace, not just a traditional capitalist marketplace, we can use procurement as a tool to build healthy communities. And that comes by ensuring then that the Black businesses and Indigenous owned businesses, social enterprises have the capacity to engage as either if not the primary supplier, in the supply chain, so the primary supplier. So in my mind, what we're trying to do is really shift the marketplace to a social value marketplace. And that means buying and selling with impact, not just buying for lowest price.
Right. Excellent points there, David. And in regards to how does somebody get edified in regards to, I guess how social procurement works from your perspective, because obviously yourself being in it for decades, but for somebody who's just coming into learning and wanting to understand social procurement, what would you say are the best ways for them to just to be, I guess, alert and aware?
So I think it's really, there's two sides to it. I think some of us and most of us, a lot of this on this discussion are the intermediaries that are trying to create that ecosystem. So many small businesses and medium-sized businesses, they're really focused on creating jobs and getting their work done. So I think there's a responsibility. That's why I applaud the work that Narissa's doing and Victor's doing and TCBN, what Rosemary is doing, because what they're doing is really as intermediaries between the buyers and the sellers, creating those opportunities. Because most of the small businesses that we work with, they're so focused on the day-to-day. I gotta meet my demands. I gotta work with my employees. I gotta build my business. I gotta do the banking. We really need the support of the intermediaries, and that's where I sessions like today are so important, because we start to share, we start to build out that ecosystem. So none of us are working alone in it. We're partnering, because it's really the networks that create the opportunities for the individual businesses. Because some of the businesses have the time to participate, but a lot of the small businesses we work with, it's like, boy, it's every day. You gotta be on the table working.
And thank you very much for that, David. And I think it's important for us to know that when it comes down to social procurement, it is something that it doesn't get taught in schools, and it doesn't get taught, obviously, usually even within the post-secondary framework. So, it's very important that you shared that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I actually teach one of the things I do is teach in an MBA class, and my students are always amazed when they get to the social enterprise class that you're actually allowed to talk about business that has not just a social conscience, but actually practices and integrates social value into the business. And I think that's what we're shifting. We're shifting the model of business from just being about, how do I accumulate the most dollars to how do I really help community? How do I build community? And when we shift the supply side, we've got to shift the demand side, and then we change the marketplace.
Thank you very much for that. Much appreciated. And we're going to go to our next guest, Stephen. Thank you very much for that, David, and we'll be back to you shortly. So, Stephen, good evening.
Good evening. Hey, how are you?
And how is my fellow Bajan today?
Doing good.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. So, just a quick question for you, Stephen. In your leadership role as president of the African Canadian Contractors Association, what is your ultimate goal for African Canadian contractors?
Yeah, our main goal is to increase the number of Black contractors in Canada, to increase the capacity, and to increase the amount of projects that they are able to go for, including procurement, PAC. We have an agreement with PAC that we are trying to get everyone know how to go after projects with the government. I think as Narissa and David said, it is quite a challenge. If you go to the website, it is a mess. So you got to get used to that. But our main goal is to grow the contractors through showing them different ways to apply for a job, getting them to learn the ropes of just contracts, of bidding. And there's a set form for construction. It's very rigid. And that's the main thing we are doing, just education, new ways to do anything we need to do with construction, even technology. There's a lot of technology right now that's coming up. Construction was known to be the last industry to start using technology. Now the floodgates are opening, and we have to jump on that bandwagon to get used to it, to make better profits and build our businesses.
All right. So in terms of working with African Canadians and just the new era of procurement, because a lot of our businesses, obviously in the industry of where it comes down to construction and whatnot, or contracting, have not had these opportunities in the past. So how do you get other people, other contractors prepared for this new realm of opportunity?
One of the main things we're doing, as I mentioned, is education. We have in webinars every month. We actually partner with CIBC, the bank, and they had one webinar last month showing off their new entrepreneur fund and breaking it down so everyone can understand it. That was really important. We partnered with BDC, Business Development Bank of Canada, and they actually come in and talk to our members or anyone. We invite the public to that, to explain what they're doing. They do growth building behind lending money, and they're different than the banks. They lend money quite different. They're more expensive, but you can actually get money for your business easier with BDC. But they come in and explain how they do things and their growth. They have a growth management program that they come into your business and show you how you can actually grow your business. Webinars, estimating is one big thing that our customers or members need.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, estimating, project management, accounting. That's another thing, because a lot of members, they just started the business. They're working with one person. They don't have a website, or they don't even have an accountant yet. And I think, as David said, these guys are working in the field. They don't have time to do the books. They don't have time to plan. So we are, as you say, intermediary, trying to find the work for them and said, hey, let's do this. We can help you set up your bids. We help you to find an estimator to help you. And growth is that the way they have to learn all these new things that they never had before. Talking to one person to get a job is one thing. You're going to talk to a company, and you cannot ask for 50% down when you're going for a commercial contract. And you have to have money in the bank, which is another problem we'll talk about later.
Mhm.
Mainly education is what we are focusing on.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Stephen. And, obviously myself having some exposure to what you do and then all the great work that you do with contractors, needless to say that this is an important area because for so many of the contractors, they've been from the African Canadian community, just specifically within the, doing the subcontracting and whatnot. But obviously there's a larger role for contractors to play in terms of getting some of these bigger opportunities, which obviously will help fuel the next stage of development. So thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. And our next guest, where we're going to ask a question, is Rosemary, a good friend of mine, Rosemary Powell. Good evening.
Good evening.
And how are you, my friend?
I am doing well. I'm actually down by George Brown. We're so proud of the Black, folks who ran for office during this last municipal elections. And, we're seeing that there is a changing landscape and Black folks are getting, taking their space in this.
I think you had a little bit of a glitch there, Rosemary. We didn't hear what you just said. Taking their space.
Roderick?
Yeah, I'm here. I could hear you.
Okay.
But I think you had a little bit of a glitch there.
Okay.
Yeah. Last thing we heard is that are taking their space.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, all right. I thought you might have got cut off there. It sounded like that. Okay, so as the executive director of TCBN and a driving force behind community benefit agreements, actually, let's explain what are community benefit agreements for those people who may not be aware, and then I'll get to the next part of the question.
Okay, that's a good question. So yeah, I love what David says. Right now we're trying to build, or we're in a moment. We're in a moment following leadership happening in the Black Lives Matter movement, post-COVID, the norm is no longer acceptable. And we have to get to that social value marketplace that David talks about. And you know what? Community benefits agreements is one of those tools that can help to facilitate that. TCBN, we use community benefits agreements as a process to be able to intervene in the planning and decision-making process as it relates to development. Construction is one of those industries where our taxpayer dollars are being used quite extensively to build hospitals, schools, bridges, transit. And we need to make sure that as we invest in this infrastructure, that nobody gets left behind, that Black and racialized peoples, just as much as everyone else, has an opportunity to be able to tap into the jobs and opportunities that are being created. And so with community benefits agreements, we basically use that as a tool to reach out to the client owners, to reach out to the developers, to advocate to our different levels of government to say, how do we create intentional processes, a contract with community, where we can identify specific apprenticeships for Black and racialized folks, women, newcomers, Indigenous peoples, youth, as we're building construction. What about those professional, administrative, and technical jobs? So the planners, the designers, the architects. What about those supply chain opportunities that come? So social procurement, how do we make sure that Black businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, local businesses, those small mom and pop shops who otherwise wouldn't be able to compete for, in the case of the Eglinton Crosstown, the first initiative that we started, an $8.5 billion project. No mom and pop shop could actually compete. And what about those social enterprises who are business entrepreneurs, absolutely, but they're also doing everything within their power to create social value, right? These are social enterprises who might train and develop people and give them work experience. These are social enterprises, for example, who might provide environmental services, the kinds of things that most businesses won't look at because the profit margins might not be there. How do we make sure that we can facilitate that? Well, community benefits agreements is that process to be able to do that. And like I said, it's a contract with the client owner, the government, the community, so that all stakeholders are at the table discussing how do we create those intentional carve-outs for opportunities for people who has been historically left out of the labor market, who has been historically left out of the planning process, who has been historically left out of the economy.
Absolutely. And, obviously myself having the honor and the pleasure working along TCBN and some of the programming like the Next Gen program, and we bear witness on the amazing work and the critical work that you're doing in terms of providing opportunities and also conduits into, social procurement, literally. And also just even in terms of getting involved in the trade. So definitely we commend the work that you're doing. So on that note, what are some of the important wins? And I know you just talked about some of them, but what are some of the important wins that you can say that TCBN has achieved in overcoming some of those systemic barriers, and in terms of, obviously just what you're mitigating in the sense of some of that adversity for ultimately for the contractors and also people entering the trades?
Well, 9 years ago, when the Toronto Community Benefits Network started, it was really out of conflict. And so we had recognized that the Eglinton Crosstown, an $8.5 billion project was being built. It was going to be going through neighborhood improvement areas that had been identified by the City of Toronto and United Way as being neighborhoods that are dealing with high levels of poverty and unemployment, youth delinquency. They're communities that have high levels of Black and racialized peoples who live in there. And so we started out in a place of conflict where we basically literally went with our banners outside of the Metrolinx boardroom. They were having their boardroom meeting. That was just one of the tactics that we used. And we said, we need to talk with you. And they were really embarrassed by it. And they didn't want to have this on the media. And so they said, okay, let's talk. And that's how all of that got started. Now, 9 years later with TCBN, what we're seeing is that the community benefits movement is really growing all across Canada. When we started out 9 years ago, the first thing that we were able to achieve was Bill 6, Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act, where we were able to codify community benefits agreements into the provincial government policy. Then we moved on and we got a community benefits framework at the City of Toronto. To date, we now have 4 major community benefits initiatives that we are directly as a community organization helping to support the implementation. What we're seeing is community benefits coalitions developing all across Ontario and all across Canada. And so it's not just a little Toronto thing, or, community benefits had also been in Vancouver at the time as well. And there were maybe other community benefits initiatives across Canada, but the profile just wasn't there. But now we're seeing that the movement is growing. More and more policies are happening at all levels of government. More community benefits coalitions are developing, and this is going to be, or it's starting to be, just a way of doing business. That social value marketplace has to happen. It's no longer acceptable to retain the status quo. We're not accepting it, and the governments are listening, the client owners are listening, the general contractors, the unions, but also community is rising up and innovating and developing programs and services and developing businesses to be able to tap into the opportunities and associations. And it's absolutely incredible.
Absolutely. And we, as not just Torontonians, as Canadians, thank you, like from, I guess as you say, the bottom of our hearts for your leadership and the tenacity in which you go and don't take no for an answer. And I really mean that in the sense of obviously you bearing witness again of the work that you do and just advocating for, people who don't necessarily have a voice, but empowering them to, have the presence and have a space within this Canadian context. Thank you very much, Rosemary. Okay. Our next person we want to talk to on the panel is Clement. Good evening, Clement.
Good evening, Roderick. How are you doing?
I'm well, my brother, and yourself?
Doing very well, brother.
Okay. So the BIPOC Foundation has been exponentially scaling in Lethbridge, Alberta. And for those who don't know, I'll let you explain a little bit about where, actually, let's explain where Lethbridge, Alberta is into context when it comes down to, I guess, some of the larger cities like Calgary and Edmonton. For those people who don't know, where is Lethbridge, Alberta?
Hey, obviously, Lethbridge, Alberta is in Alberta, and we've become recently, in the past few years, the third most populous city in Alberta. To put context to that, we're still regarded as rural Alberta. We're in the south western part of the province, and we're just behind Calgary and Edmonton. So Calgary is probably sitting at about the population of 1.6, 1.7 million, and Edmonton sits at about 1.2, 1.3 million in population. And here is Lethbridge, we're sitting at about 120K people in population. So there's Lethbridge for you.
All right, thanks for that geography lesson. So do you feel there's enough capacity building and understanding of social procurement within the entrepreneurships that you're working with right now? Or sorry, the entrepreneurs that you're working with right now in terms of that social procurement and understanding it?
Well, I like to say with BIPOC Foundation, our mission is very, very clear, and it borders around economic empowerment, financial inclusion, and representation. And we have been very vocal, across the region and amongst the stakeholders to understand the importance of this. And as far as the entrepreneurs that we're working with, what we have found since we started full-blown operation earlier in the year is there are people who are interested, but there is not enough information, right? And a couple of panelists here today have already echoed that. And where I see a gap is that education. And when people hear procurement, and even on the context of government procurement, what comes into their mind is that $24 billion, that our good friend David has mentioned earlier. They do not understand that when it comes to procurement, that there is a variation, and there is different areas that everybody can fit in. And Narissa, when she was speaking, mentioned services. There is service-based, there is product-based, there is various kind of procurement. There is the construction part. There is, different areas where people can fit in. But because of the lack of knowledge and lack of information, so to speak, on and even for folks who have tried in the past, and there were all these barriers that they would face, or barriers they have had other people face who tried in the past. They just upfront, right out the bat, rule themselves out in getting involved, in procurement at all. And, they just face, their business and trying to turn over profits. And we've seen a lot of small businesses, and to put context to small businesses, we're not even talking businesses that are making 500K or even 100K or even sometimes 50K. So we are actually right at the baseline, trying to get people off, the ground, help people get their businesses off the ground and get them going. And where I see a gap is that education piece, which we're looking to tap into ecosystem partnership, not to reinvent the wheel, to plug that gap as we go, building that into our 2023 agenda to begin to make people understand, hey, that there is opportunity in this space and that we want our people represented when it comes to procurement.
Absolutely, and it's interesting that you mentioned some of the other panelists and what they mentioned, and as David was mentioning that he teaches an MBA course, and that's basically where a lot of students at that level are getting introduced to social procurement, and I think the earlier that our community and other communities that are not at the table get an understanding of what procurement is, that there'll be obviously less intimidation, obviously more awareness, but then the ability then to start to scratch away at the surface and to dig deeper in terms of just being a part of this, obviously this opportunity that just not changes lives, but changes intergenerational wealth. and the capacity of building that within communities that are underrepresented. Excellent work that you're doing out there in Alberta, and we definitely look forward to hearing more. And just for people's understanding, in Lethbridge, what is the main industry that brings people out there?
The biggest industry out here, of course, we thought ourselves as the food corridor of the nation. So there's a lot of agriculture going on here in Lethbridge, even though as BIPOC Foundation, our work cuts across the entire Western Canadian region, but we're headquartered in Lethbridge, and like you've mentioned, agro. The McCains of this world, the Rogers Sugar of this world, and all those other, the big beef farmers, they're all in this region, blessing the world with their agro products.
Right. And do you find that a lot of BIPOC businesses are in that agricultural world within that? And I know you represent more than just Lethbridge, but in the sense of, is there businesses that, people who look like us are involved in that agro world that you know of?
Well, we're beginning to see that now. That has not existed up until now. There is more people beginning to think agro, especially within our community, and even just at the level of technology in the agro space. And that's where we are beginning to find people coming. What we have really seen is people coming in the food space, not necessarily the agro space, so the processing space, where they take those products and add value and, repackage and send into the market. But we're encouraging folks, who are coming through our doors, especially those with potential, especially those who come from immigrants who have been farmers before, or, who come from farming background and they're coming here. We're letting them know that, hey, there is no roadblock to getting into that space. There is no gatekeepers. We can, certainly work with the stakeholders and make it easy for you to, get into that space if you do really want to get into the agro space.
All right. Thank you very much for that. And it's interesting just to note that obviously agriculture or agroculture is something that we all need. And, obviously outside of Canada, there's our diaspora, and providing opportunities for growth in that space can also feed other people's right across, this globe. So great to have you here, my brother, and to speak on that note.
Thank you, Roderick.
You're welcome. Our next person from the panel, what we're going to be speaking to, we're going to go back to Narissa. And again, good evening to you, Narissa.
Good evening.
All right. So in the social procurement landscape in BC, what are some of the best practices that inspire you the most?
I think one that the city of Vancouver, actually, and that's one that by Social Canada, I believe, worked on with them, is they've got a mandatory CBA policy, which is what Rosemary was speaking about, where developments over 45,000 square meters, those are required to work under the CBA policy. And it's really a collaborative way to promote that growth of the communities that they're investing in. So specific to social procurement, these developers have to source, I believe it's a minimum of 10% of material goods and services from diverse and equity-seeking businesses, with a priority on Vancouver-based businesses. So I think that's a model that we would like to see more of, more municipalities taking hold of that type of CBA policy and pushing those things forward to help to grow the equity that we have and the opportunities we have as Black-owned businesses within that supply chain ecosystem.
All right, excellent. And I think it's important that obviously the just the growth of the knowledge and awareness around CBAs are starting to get obviously more ingrained within our larger cities and whatnot. So what are some of the things that you think you could do just to even grow that awareness even more, so that people could be aware of it and obviously be a part of that process?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's incumbent upon us as Black Business Association ecosystem partners is to bring the awareness to our members, because they need to understand what's available to them. So for example, we champion by Social Canada's work because they offer training, not just to purchasers, that purchaser work that they do, they're embedding social procurement best practice and culture into their policies. And in addition, they support social value suppliers in social procurement readiness training and storytelling. And this year we had our first cohort. They were trained by Social Canada on that social procurement readiness training and storytelling piece, because we have to work on both sides. Obviously, we have to work on the purchasers, and they have to have policies in place ingrained in the foundation of their business model.
Right.
To really reflect the changes and they want to see, and to be longstanding in their journey. But we also have to work on our side as Black businesses, so that we are setting ourselves up for success as well.
All right, thank you very much for that. And again, thank you very much for all that important work that you're doing in British Columbia, and just bringing opportunity and awareness to our businesses, and hopefully that word, and then the awareness that you bring continues to reverberate, so that again, not just within BC, but also right across the country, people can get more of an understanding of the importance of the work that you do in terms of procurement. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, David. So if you had a magic wand and could shift regulatory frameworks in Canada, what would you do?
So I don't think we have so much a problem right now with the regulatory framework. All of our research says the business development systems, things like BDC, they've got money, they've got, what our challenge is we need a level playing field for the social value for the Black businesses. Basically, they've been excluded from access to what's there. I mean, I look, and a lot of the work we do is with social enterprises, and BDC won't make a loan to a social enterprise unless a board member puts up their house as collateral. Well, that sort of like says, don't go to BDC if you are not a traditional business. And for a small business to go through the bureaucratic process of trying to get access to like the existing services. So I think the policy framework, all of us together, I think we're moving that. But when we did some research, it was like over 10 years ago, 98% of the business services, the lending things like community futures and small business services, they don't exclude a social value, but they just don't practice it. So no one says to the business service, like, how many Black businesses did you lend to this year? How many came in the door? What did you do to bring them in the door? Did you reach out and be more inclusive, or did you just wait for the traditional people to walk in your door? So I think what we need to do is change the practice of how we use those tools and resources to be inclusive, not to just sit back and wait for something to change. Because I think all of us, and I have to commend the work everyone has done, the policy shifting, like what Rosemary and others are talking about, the frameworks like City of Toronto is saying, yeah, we do CBAs, we do, but measure it, make it happen. Don't just sit back on the laurels of we've got a nice policy. City of Vancouver passed a social procurement policy back in 2004. And I'll tell you, if they didn't have insurance with Green Shield Canada, they'd be, lost in measuring outcomes. So it's really, what I want to see is the shift of requiring reporting out on what these policies are accomplishing, because I think that's our barrier right now. I mean, all of us are willing. You guys are doing amazing work to get businesses ready, but if the door isn't open, there's no opportunity.
So you raise a couple of great points there. So why do you think there's that disparity, or is it just the old guard protecting, their investments, or their obviously their knowingness in terms of what procurement opportunities, and just having, I guess, that small, oligarchy, if you want to call it that, in that sense of just being able to bid and to get these contracts? What do you think is behind the protectiveness of not letting other people in?
So part of it was, and like we were working with one construction company, and they were basically said, you know, we always bid because we can come in on time, on budget. They were never asked, like, who's in your supply chain? They never asked, what's the color of your apprenticeships? You know, where do your apprenticeships come from? They were just like, who's got the lowest bid and can come in on time? So now as we change the demand, all of a sudden these businesses are going out and saying, oh, shit, how do I get, you know, how do I diversify my supply chain so I get more points? So because we're now making it a financial gain for the big businesses, their competitive marketplace is shifting. It's not lowest price. Now all of a sudden the demand, the owners like Rosemarie is talking about, pushing the demand side is the first step